This is Dr. Panda.
Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a homosexual in different periods of European history? How did Europeans' attitudes toward homosexuality evolve, moving from acceptance to persecution and eventually to acceptance once more? Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Panda. Today, let's explore how Europeans viewed and treated same-sex desire throughout the ages. The open and inclusive ancient Greece. Throughout human history, ancient Greece was arguably the most accepting of same-sex desire. In renowned city-states like Athens and Sparta, homosexuality wasn't just accepted, it was often encouraged. However, same-sex relationships in ancient Greece were vastly different from modern understandings of homosexuality. These relationships were typically formed between a mature man and a young boy. The older man was known as the lover, Erastes, while the boy was called the beloved, Ereminos. Such relationships were closely linked to education rather than being solely sexual. The older man acted as a mentor, teaching the boy knowledge, virtues, and social skills. This bond was seen as a rite of passage, akin to a special form of mentorship that almost every man experienced. For example, in Sparta, a city-state famed for its militaristic culture, it was considered shameful for a boy to fail to find an older partner. Such boys were mocked for lacking charm or appeal. In Athens, these relationships were even legally protected. In the 5th century BCE, two Athenian men fell in love with a beautiful young boy named Theodotus. One was an older man whose name has been lost to history, while the other was a younger man named Simon. Despite the older man's age and physical frailty compared to the vigorous Simon, the boy chose the elder. Why? Because Simon was jealous and impulsive, even resorting to violence to force the boy to be with him. In contrast, the older man sought to win the boy's affection through kindness and care. To escape Simon's relentless harassment, the older man took the boy on a long journey away from Athens, hoping the distance would help Simon forget him. However, this plan backfired. Devastated by the boy's absence, Simon became even more desperate. Upon learning that the two had returned to Athens, Simon gathered a group of men and attempted to kidnap the boy, determined to ensure he could never leave him again. This led to a violent confrontation between Simon's group and the older man, leaving both sides injured. Afterward, Simon, displaying incredible audacity, filed a lawsuit against the older man, accusing him of attempted murder. Forced to appear in court, the older man recounted the entire ordeal, which was carefully recorded in court proceedings and preserved to this day. It is thanks to this legal record that we know about this 2,500-year-old love triangle. Moreover, the older man's candid testimony offers a rare glimpse into how common and socially accepted same-sex relationships were in ancient Athens, reflecting their normalization within society at the time. Of course, same-sex relationships in ancient Greece were not limited to the bonds between mature men and young boys. They also existed between adult men and between women. For instance, Alexander the Great of Macedonia and his companion Hephaestion were an adult same-sex couple who had grown up together. The famous Greek poet Sappho, on the other hand, is considered a symbol of lesbian love. The term lesbian itself derives from the island of Lesbos, where Sappho lived. However, relationships between adult men and between women were less common and less documented. The more prevalent form was the romantic and often educational bond between mature men and young boys. Ancient Rome. Same-sex desire linked to power. In the 2nd century BCE, Rome conquered Greece through the 4 Macedonian Wars. However, despite ruling over the Greek city-states, Rome was deeply influenced by Greek culture, ultimately absorbing many aspects of it, including the culture of same-sex relationships. Homosexuality was widespread in Roman society, and many emperors had open same-sex lovers. One of the most notable examples is Emperor Hadrian, one of the 5 good emperors. Hadrian was passionate about Greek culture, sporting a beard like a Greek philosopher. In 124 CE, during a trip to the province of Bithynia, he fell deeply in love with a beautiful young boy named Antinous. From that moment on, Antinous was constantly by Hadrian's side until his tragic drowning in the Nile River on October 30th, 130 CE. After Antinous' death, Emperor Hadrian was overwhelmed with grief and honored him in every way possible. He even had Antinous deified and erected statues of him throughout the empire. The relationship between Hadrian and Antinous closely resembled the same-sex relationships in ancient Greece. In fact, in ancient Roman society, same-sex desire was more closely linked to physical lust, driven by desire rather than the educational or mentoring aspects seen in ancient Greece. Roman same-sex relationships typically involved a power dynamic where higher-status individuals took the dominant role, while lower-status individuals played the passive role. Roman citizens could freely engage with non-citizen males, such as slaves and male prostitutes. Emperors and military officers, for example, could possess their attendants at will. However, the dominant individual had to maintain the active role. If a higher status person took the passive role in sexual relations, it would be seen as a source of shame and mockery. A well-known example is Julius Caesar. When he had a sexual relationship with King Nicomedes of Bithynia and took the passive role, his political enemies frequently mocked him. They would sarcastically refer to him as the queen. The poet Licinius Calvus even wrote a poem ridiculing Caesar, claiming that Nicomedes' wealth had been squandered by Caesar lounging in the king's bed. Cicero, in his letters, also recorded how Caesar was brought to the king's bedroom by Nicomedes' servant, dressed in loose purple robes and lying on a golden bed. He also sarcastically commented that the descendant of Venus lost his innocence in Bithynia. However, the consequences of taking the passive role were generally limited to ridicule, meaning that as long as one had thick enough skin, it wasn't a major issue. Consequently, many Roman emperors, such as Nero and Elagabalus, were known to have taken the passive role in same-sex relationships. Of course, there were also equal same-sex relationships in ancient Rome, though these were generally very secretive and not known to the public. Same-sex relationships were reportedly quite common in the Roman army. A famous example is the relationship between the gladiators Priscus and Verus. They trained, lived, and fought together, becoming nearly unbeatable and well-known stars by the end of the 1st century. However, in 80 CE, to celebrate the opening of the Flavian amphitheater, the emperor ordered them to fight each other until one of them died. With a shared resolve to face death together, they engaged in a spectacular battle. In the end, Emperor Titus was so moved by their loyalty and bravery that he declared both of them victors and granted them their freedom. The Roman poet Martial even wrote a poem to praise this remarkable event. The rise of Christianity, the darkest era for same-sex desire. However, during the later years of the Roman Empire, with the rise of Christianity, Roman attitudes toward same-sex desire underwent a dramatic shift. Christian doctrine strongly condemned homosexuality, and as a result, same-sex relationships were increasingly rejected by society and eventually outlawed. In medieval Europe, Christianity dominated, and its teachings held that the sole purpose of sex was procreation. Any sexual activity not aimed at reproduction was considered sinful, including relations with boys and girls, as well as adultery between men and women. Thus, throughout the Middle Ages, homosexuals faced intense social ostracism. Once discovered, the consequences could range from social death to physical annihilation. Nearly every country and city enacted laws explicitly banning same-sex acts, with punishments that included fines, flogging, exile, and even execution. Some places even witnessed persecution campaigns specifically targeting homosexuals. In such a sexually repressive society, under the harsh teachings of the Church, even kings were not able to escape their fate. From 1307 to 1327, King Edward II of England paid a heavy price for his same-sex desires. He was deeply in love with his childhood knight, Piers, but was politically forced to marry Princess Isabella of France. To comfort Piers, Edward gave him much of Isabella's dowry. This act not only angered Isabella but also enraged the English nobility. The nobles united to pressure Edward to exile Piers, but unable to endure the separation, Edward secretly brought him back after only a year. The nobles, outraged, carried out a coup and had Piers killed. It is rumored that Edward, heartbroken, stayed beside Pierre's body for more than 10 days until the corpse began to decay and stink, at which point his attendants finally dragged him away. Edward II's reign grew increasingly unstable over time. In 1326, Queen Isabella returned to France, joined forces with her lover, and launched an invasion of England, toppling Edward's rule. The following year, Edward was imprisoned and met a gruesome end. The arrival of the Renaissance, a society and ideals in progress. The wheels of history continued to turn, and between the 14th and 16th centuries, the Renaissance movement emerged, bringing with it a revival of ancient Greek and Roman culture and the rise of humanism. While same-sex desire was still not socially accepted, compared to the extreme stigmatization of the medieval period, this era saw the emergence of art subtly reflecting same-sex emotions. Prominent figures in the arts, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, were even rumored to have had same-sex relationships, signaling a loosening of sexual attitudes. Although expressions of same-sex desire became more visible during the Renaissance, open discussion remained far from acceptable. True transformation began in the 18th century with the Enlightenment, when people began to approach sexual orientation from a rational and scientific perspective. In 1869, German Dr. Karl Heinrich Ulrichs first coined the term homosexuality, but at that time it was still regarded as a disease rather than a natural behavior. This shift reflected the growing complexity in society's understanding of sexuality, moving from defining homosexuality as a behavior to exploring it in terms of identity and relationships. During World War II, the harsh policies of the Nazis pushed homosexuality to the fringes of society, delivering a severe blow to the community. In the mid-20th century, the United States and the United Kingdom led a global shift in attitudes toward homosexuality. The passage of the Sexual Offences Act in 1967 marked the decriminalization of homosexuality in England and Wales. In 1980, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the list of mental disorders in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, further emphasizing that it is part of human diversity. The 1969 Stonewall riots and the annual Pride parades held every June have become symbols of the global struggle for equality and acceptance. This movement changed the course of history, granting unprecedented dignity and rights to the LGBTQ+ community. Today, the understanding and acceptance of homosexuality have deeply permeated various facets of Western society. It is no longer just a relic of history, but an integral part of modern civilization. We have witnessed the ups and downs of the history of homosexuality, and we look forward to a future that is even more inclusive and equal. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If any of you have your own perspectives, or if you think there are any errors in the video, feel free to leave a comment in the discussion section. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.